Something like that.
It's the legendary Chris Buck. Pointing the wrong way. I can't get my camera over there. Welcome, Chris. Thank you for joining me today for a little blues mini masterclass.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me, man.
Yeah, you're very welcome. It sounds like you're a bit quiet in my headphones. So
sorry,
I'm just
I'll move closer to the mic.
I can adjust your mic volume over here. Oh no, somebody's already on that. Somebody's turning. There's too many cooks in the kitchen today. Anyway, how you doing today? You having a good day?
I'm very good, thank you. Yes, as you can see, I'm in Santa's grotto, so busy beavering away, getting all the presents ready. So no, I'm good. It's chaos.
And just back off tour, right?
Yeah, we got back a couple of days back. We finished up. We finished our own tour and then jumped straight on a tour with Miles Kennedy from Alter Bridge doing his solo tour. So we went all around Europe with him. And then we went over to Ireland and Northern Ireland. So we finished up in Belfast, right in the middle of Storm Dara, and then had to navigate getting back from Belfast to Scotland in the middle of a storm. So I'm glad to be back on terra firma, if I'm entirely honest. Wow. I've not got my sea legs at the best of times. So glad to be back on solid ground.
That sounds a bit terrifying. And you're coming from Wales today, then?
Yes, coming live. And somewhat alive from Wales. No, it's been good. It's been a very busy year, so no complaints from me, really.
Amazing.
I mean, plenty of complaints. I do nothing but moan, but I shouldn't.
No. Yeah, you're allowed to have a moan every now and again. Okay, let's dig into a bit of guitar stuff. So, if you don't mind, I'd like you to take it right back to what got you started playing guitar, or when did you start? Were you super young? You know, what inspired you to pick up playing guitar at all?
My parents bought me a 3/4 size, and do you know what? This is a very recent memory because I've just discovered it the other day clearing out my old man's house. My parents bought me a 3/4 size acoustic guitar when I was probably, I don't know, maybe 7, 8, maybe. And the first thing I did, apparently, was hold it like this. So I had a clip, and someone turned it around for me. Saved me a lifetime of misery trying to find left-handed guitars. So there's a couple of photos of me.
Left-handed?
Well, no, not. My father was kind of fairly ambidextrous. It was a bizarre little party trick he used to have, was that he could write his signature backwards with his left hand. As you can imagine, that made him a lot of money over the years. I failed to find his fortune with that one, but he was left-handed as a kid, and I think my grandfather, who was left-handed as well, had a lifetime of misery of, especially back in the days when left-handed stuff wasn't so kind of readily available. I think I think especially back in the 40s when my grandfather would have been growing up, you were the spawn of Satan if you were left-handed. It was kind of looked upon as a less than desirable trait. So I think my grandfather would have had a lifetime of kind of trying to outrun it. My dad then obviously was left-handed by birth, I guess, but started using his right hand. So I think it's probably in me somewhere. I do a couple of things left-handed. I play pool left-handed, bizarrely. So there's a very small element of ambidextrousness in me, I guess, but I am also the clumsiest person you've ever met, so it's kind of that outweighs it. But yeah, there's a couple of photos of me holding this 3/4 size guitar the wrong way around, but I didn't really stick at it. I didn't play it particularly. It was just something that got stuck in a case and locked away. But it was, I guess I would have been about 11, 12 maybe, just started high school, and there was a mate of mine, Josh, who was in the way that you can only have when you're, I don't know, that age, was also my best friend and arch nemesis. Just in constant competition with him, whether it was in a sporting respect, he was taller, he was faster, he was better looking, he'd had me kind of nailed really on all accounts. Apart from guitar, he started having guitar lessons, so I thought, well, let's see if I can be any better at guitar than him. And he gave up after about, 3 weeks, so I kind of won that one by proxy, really. But once I realised that school guitar lessons also coincided with maths lessons, I was definitely in. I was hook, line and sinker. So yeah, it's been flipping out 22, 23 years, I guess, since then. So yeah, a fair old while of playing guitar. I've been playing guitar longer than I've not been playing guitar.
So what what things were you playing when you got started? Who were your early influences? Do you remember, were you doing lessons at school or lessons outside of school or just listening to records? What was the approach?
Yeah, like I think it was a weird one because it was simultaneously my old man's record collection, which was very Beatles inspired, very Stones, very a child of the kind of late 50s really. So all of the kind of usual stuff really. But the stuff that I kind of really latched onto first in a big way that I kind of discovered myself was like punk rock. It was Blink-182, it was Newfound Glory, it was The Offspring, it was Alkaline Trio, all that kind of early 2000s, I guess, Jimmy Eat World. So there was a lot of power muting, a lot of power chords. So once I was taught a power chord in school, I was away. I was the coolest guy in the world because it gave me access to pretty much any song that I wanted to learn. So I had lessons briefly in school. Initially you had to pay for them. Basically, it was a kind of an extracurricular thing that you could pay for basically. But then after about a year or two, maybe they made them free, which in theory is great. In reality, the caveat of that was that you had to do grades. That was the thing the school wanted. If we're going to give you these free lessons, we want to see something for it. Which the result of which was me having a stab at grades. So I passed my grade 2 by 1%, which was undoubtedly a pity pass because I just went to pieces. I don't think I rehearsed anywhere near as enough, as I should have done. I was kind of, as far as I was concerned, I was nailing it. But when it came to the day, it was less than great. So,
Is it classical guitar or like rock school?
No, rock school stuff. So it was all, I mean, in more recent years, whenever I've seen any rock school stuff, it's actual songs. It's like Metallica songs and stuff like that, which is great. Because when I was doing it, it was, poor approximations of popular songs, so, which is less than inspiring when you're 14 and all you want to do is play, Offspring or whatever. So, a brief period doing lessons in school. I had a couple of lessons outside school as well, fairly short-lived. So it was, I guess when I really started kind of playing guitar in earnest was pretty much the early days of YouTube. So it was just going on and watching bands that I liked and watching what they were doing and trying to figure out where their fingers were going. So not entirely self-taught, but all the cool stuff, I guess, self-taught for the most part.
And working out stuff off records then? So when you were doing the power chords thing into Offspring, was it like just listening to it and messing about until you figured out how to play it and playing along with the records, that kind of approach?
Pretty much. The one thing my guitar teacher in school really kind of drilled into me was the importance of being able to use my ear as opposed to being overly reliant on tabs or whatever it was. You're like they're great and they have their place, and use it to refresh your memory if you've forgotten how to play it from the lesson the week before. But if you can use your ear, that's infinite. That's kind of opens up a world of possibilities just to be able to figure out what you're listening to. So I didn't really appreciate it at the time, but we would do a lot of, he would basically turn his back to me in a lesson and play play a major or a minor chord or a seventh chord and try and get me to identify what chord I was hearing, which at the time isn't necessarily the most exciting thing in the world, but I think it gave me a pretty good, I don't have, kind of perfect pitch by any stretch, but I have, I guess, relative pitch, and certain notes, you'll be out, and a track will come on and a note will leap out at me and I'll be able to go, oh, that's a C or that's an E or that's an A. Mm-hmm. So I think my ear, just through having done it so much, is pretty well attuned, I guess.
And was that solos as well? And at what point was it kind of learning Rolling Stones solos, or was it Led Zeppelin?
Yeah.
At what point did you get into doing lead line?
I remember Dancing in the Moonlight by Thin Lizzy was one of the first solos that I actually learnt pretty much note for note. I guess this is, again, it's a kind of ethos I've taken with me through life, I guess, is that for the most part, in the genre that I'm in the style of music that I listen to and that I love, solos were very rarely written. They were improvised to some extent, and I mean, even solos now that I've recorded with a band, if they're not entirely improvised, they're the culmination of a couple of months of touring that song and it being an improvised thing that's kind of turned into a bit more of a structured piece. I've never sat down and actually written the solo. I'm not bloody diligent enough for one, to be honest. I have the attention span of a squirrel, so I kind of applied that logic to learning, I guess, to a degree as well. So it was always a case of like, well, okay, if there's a specific lick that I want to learn, that's an entirely different thing. But it's pointless learning a Jimmy Page solo from start to finish because he was busking it. He was making it up as he went along. I kind of want to get inside their head as much as I wanted to get inside the notes themselves and see where the inspiration for that, see why they structured it in the way that they did, and that's undoubtedly where Slash came in for me. I'm a huge Slash fan, always have been. Guns N' Roses in particular were like the first real band that I kind of got into in a massive way, and really kind of went down the rabbit hole of bootlegs and kind of live DVDs and all this kind of stuff from the late 80s and early 90s. So it was a bit of a contradiction, I guess. When I say that to people, they expect me to have this armory of slash licks, but I can't play the solo in Sweet Child of Mine correctly, for example, which I guess is one of the kind of most identifiable rock solos ever recorded. But it was a sense of not wanting to learn that solo because I didn't really see much merit in that. I wanted to learn, okay, so there's that kind of build section in the middle of the solo where it's just hammering away on A, and kind of figure out, so he's gone from low to high there to build the kind of tension and build this sense of release when it gets to the big epic bend on the 15th fret, when it goes back to E minor. So it was a case of trying to want to get inside people's heads so much as trying to actually play the notes that they played, because I guess I saw a limited amount of value in that.
Do you not think in terms of vocabulary then at all? Like, you can call it licks or phrases or vocab or whatever, but I kind of feel like that there is importance in certain vocabulary that almost all rock and blues guitar players play.
Yeah.
Whether it's and most of it stems back from like B.B. King, Albert King, Stevie Ray Vaughan, or whatever, or earlier Rolling Stones, the Beatles, whatever. There's certain phrases that we all use all the time.
Oh, absolutely.
That whether it's Slash or yourself or whatever, there are things.
Oh, totally. Undoubtedly, I have a lot of those which I kind of rely on, overly rely on. You could very easily argue, I imagine, but I try not to think in that respect, I guess, or that sense, so much as trying to think in terms of melodies, I guess, or trying to follow what I'm hearing internally, I guess, when I play, trying to think what would sound nice next, as opposed to, let's fall back on this because I know this is tried and tested and that this will work in this scenario. Undoubtedly that happens, and there's certain things that I play repeatedly, or there's certain things that I rely on, but I think it has a better chance of keeping it fresh and keeping it interesting for me. I remember going years ago, going to watch a covers band in a local pub and watching the band sound check with, I think it was I Saw Her Standing Near, the Beatles, and the guitar player obviously had this solo which he'd set out and he'd written for this track. And I remember watching him play it in soundcheck, and then they opened the set with it, and he did exactly the same solo. And I just remember thinking at the time, like, for me, that kind of feels like it totally defeats, especially playing covers, which I was already doing at that point, and, was very much doing it as a means to an end to play original music and try and earn money playing original music. I thought, well, the saving grace of this point, really, for covers for me is that, just gives you a chance to paid practice and to dick about and try things that you maybe wouldn't try in a more pressurized setting, and just experiment and try and follow your ear and try and follow the notes that you were hearing internally, as opposed to just relying on the stuff which works. And undoubtedly there's nights where you feel like you're playing with feet for hands and it's all going wrong, and at which point you kind of just to revert to type because that'll work, that'll get you through the gig. But the best nights, that I have as a musician, where you feel like you're invincible. You can try anything. You can try and slide from the bloody first to the 21st fret, and you're going to land on the right note because it's just it's all clicked, it's all gelled, So where possible, I try and just follow the melody, as pretentious as that sounds, but try and play something which is melodic, I guess.
So we've had a few lessons and discussions about where it all comes from and how. You can learn all the licks, and you can learn the phrases, and you can practice the patterns. But at the end of the day, how it actually all comes together is a bit of a mystery, and I think a beautiful one, because there isn't any tried and tested method for making that musical. Stevie Ray Vaughan talks about a thread, that there should be some thread between each thing that you play. That you might not even be aware of, or it might be a specific thing. If you're having a rough night, you might think a bit more than on the days when it, that magic day where it all just happens on its own. Did you consciously at any point try and focus on the listening to your musical imagination and how to get closer to expressing that sound? Do you get the question?
I didn't really think of it in that way. I think the way that I approach that, and the way that I try and approach pretty much any aspect of guitar playing, but especially soloing, I guess, or any kind of element of lead playing, is to, I guess, not being particularly a theory guy. I have theory in there, undoubtedly, but it's it's stuff that wasn't particularly taught to me so much as just little kind of epiphany moments that I've kind of stumbled across the way of like, oh, well, that's that makes sense now. I never learned it from a book or never kind of really had anyone poke me in the right direction as such. So it's undoubtedly stuff that I've gleaned just from years of playing myself. But one thing that I did to try and consciously do, I never really was a box guy or position guy, you know, kind of, to this day, I couldn't tell you what position 2 of the pentatonic scale is because I've never really thought of it in that way. You know, I remember being taught the position 1, and then from there trying to piece it together in terms of like, well, if that's that, thinking, well, rather than trying to figure out what it would be, you know, up there or whatever, try and think, well, instead of playing it there, I can play it there, and then try and work my way around on one string and piece the neck together that way. And I guess whether it was the reason that I was doing it or just something which kind of fell into place, I guess, was a lot of what I listened to still, but definitely as a kid when I was growing up, was stuff my mother was listening to, you know. So it was soul music, it was pop music, it was like great vocalists with great voices. And listening to those guys and thinking, well, they don't approach singing in the same way that we get bogged down with approaching guitars. They're not thinking in terms of boxes or modes or shapes or positions. It's just one fluid kind of up and down kind of thing. You know, the melody either goes up or the melody goes down. That's pretty much it, really. So, again, so much of the solo stuff that I do will be based around like 1 or 2 strings. It's not leaping around from kind of low to high or, you know, from one side of the neck to the other. Again, guitarists have a little bit of a tendency to think of the neck as kind of running that way. And I've always kind of pictured it going more that way, I guess, because it's low to high, you know. So if I'm in G minor, all of that kind of stuff that I do and rely very heavily on, that kind of more fluidy kind of vocal stuff, more often than not, is not only one string, but it's just going that way. Because that's how I picture, well, that's how a vocalist would probably approach it from that situation. They're not going, you know, kind of like, you know, kind of leaping around. It doesn't sound particularly natural. It doesn't sound, to me anyway, it doesn't sound particularly musical.
Wow. So I suspect that because you're thinking in that way, it's a bit easier to express the sound that you hear because you're moving. If you hear a certain intervallic jump,
it's usually close.
Your ear and your
never
fingers
a long way
know
away.
How far to step up the neck, which is definitely a weird thing on guitar, especially with the fact that our B string is tuned different. So the intervallic steps when we cross that way or up are a bit confusing and less than consistent. Whereas if you're going up and down strings, you're consistent all the time. Yeah. I think that's actually quite a kind of a unintentional genius move to have learnt harmonically how you can step and express an idea without it being too technical.
Yeah, I'll have that quote on my business card if I could. Unintentional genius. Genius visited, but he didn't stay too long. Yeah, definitely. And undoubtedly then and this is one facet of my playing that I undoubtedly want to improve upon, is what I hear as being the right thing to play next, or what would sound good, or what would sound right, or what would sound nice, is undoubtedly informed by the amount of theory that I know, or the kind of the notes which I'm kind of hearing, because those are the ones I know where they are, if that makes sense. What I want to do now is not so much expand on my guitar playing in a kind of theoretical sense, I guess, or in a kind of practical sense, as to kind of like, well, I want to know more shapes, or I want to be able to play faster, or I want to be able to do this or that. I want to expand what my ear hears, if that makes any sense at all. Again, in danger of disappearing up my own arsehole here, but I guess that's the point I'm trying to make, is that I want to try and hear different things as opposed to just play different things. So and then figure out how to play them.
Yeah, but being that you've already got that really strong relationship between your musical imagination and your hand, I imagine it's just going to be listening to those new things already going to cultivate a new path just from having fed those ideas in.
In theory. In practice, it'll probably be wildly more difficult than that. But I guess it's then a case of having the confidence to know where those notes are. You know, again, I get a lot of a lot of comments asking me about like modes, and somewhat ashamedly, I don't know my modes particularly. I know my Aeolian mode because that was a big slash thing. It was that kind of harmonic minor kind of thing that I used to do a lot. So I remember learning that. But then a lot of what I do, I get a lot of questions about, that sounds beautiful, what mode are you playing in? And it's like, I don't know. I tend to think of everything in a major or minor kind of respect. And then there are those extra colourful notes, which I can hear whether they would work. So much of what I do, I've been told at the very least, is modal. But I don't specifically know what those modes are. So stuff like that, I mean, through either laziness or just busyness, I guess, and trying to find the hours in the day to do it, I could definitely do with just sitting down and learning that stuff. Not because I need to know it to be able to do it, because I already do it to a degree, but it's just filling in the blanks. You know, if my guitar playing was like a colouring book, I guess, you know, kind of I've coloured in around all the edges of the pages, and then the centre of it I've kind of left untouched, I guess. So it's just filling in the kind of middle section, I guess.
I think any guitar player on the planet would be more than happy to be able to play like you and not know the music theory. So I think you've come from it from the right way. Much better than knowing all of the music theory and not being able to play, which is a curse for as many guitar players, probably more guitar players than the other way around.
Yeah, it's kind of
that's
reverse,
really fascinating. That's yeah.
It's like reverse engineering it, isn't it? It's kind of, you know, learning how to do something first before you then figure out how it works, I guess. And you know that you see a lot of kids kind of referencing, especially the kids who go on to be kind of creators or kind of like engineering geniuses or whatever, say, oh, I was the kid that was constantly taking stuff apart to figure out how it worked. I'm like, I didn't care about that. As long as it worked, I was cool with that. And, you know, how it worked was down to someone else to figure out, you know. So I was the guy that was just kind of more than happy to let the other people do the heavy lifting and me figure it out as I went. So
yeah. Oh, dude, it's absolutely working for you. Have no doubt about it. Okay, I'm going to chuck you over to a couple of questions from the Blues Immersion students. If you happen to be a Blues Immersion student, head on over to the community. There's a thread there where you can pop any extra questions that you've got from the discussion for Chris, and Fanny will copy them over to this page for me, and I'll get them to Chris, and then we'll try and get some YouTube questions in at the end. So, the first question is from Pekka, and he says, how do you practice, and what do you consider the most important aspect of practice?
Time spent, I guess. It probably won't surprise you given the conversation we've just had, that I wasn't the most diligent of practices, if that's a word. I think I was, it wasn't that I wasn't academic in school, but school was an effort. It was a very concerted effort. Everything felt like, you know, it was a very consistent criticism of me of parents' evenings and all that kind of stuff, was that he's doing okay. He's just coasting. He's just doing enough to get by, not to fail. And as far as I was concerned, that was the greatest compliment you could give me, because I'm like, well, cool, I'm just getting by on natural ability in that case. And my parents obviously kind of answer to that was, well, imagine if you just put some bloody work in, you'd be better. So guitar for me was a release from that. It was a case of, you know, well, everything, and that's why I hated it when it went to grades-based stuff in school. Because I was like, well, now it feels like maths. Now it feels like science or physics or biology or, you know, any of these other things which were very much kind of grade-based or homework-based or coursework-based, you know, whereas guitar was just purely for the love of it and purely for the expression and the fun of doing something very enjoyable. So I've never once viewed it as practice, and the few occasions where I did view it as practice for grades or for this or for that were the moments where I was like, oh, I'm just going to go and play football instead, or go and, you know, do whatever else, you know, because this is too much like hard work. My wife is watching this somewhere now with her head in her hands. So again, it wasn't a case of sitting down and viewing it as practice so much as I just always had a guitar in my hand, you know. Less so now, admittedly. I think that's probably as a consequence of just, you know, when it is your job and when there's that association of, oh, this is what puts bread on the table, this is what feeds my family, you're kind of probably slightly less inclined to kind of want to do it in your downtime, you know, and not just binge watch nonsense on Netflix. So, but when I was going through that kind of really pivotal period, I guess, of just constantly playing guitar, it was just that. I was constantly playing guitar. It was learning how to play with my fingers, you know. It was learning how to try and do stuff that I was doing with the plectrum and do that with my fingers and see if I could play as cleanly or as fluidly or as quickly or as neatly with my fingers as I could with a pick. It was learning how to run up and down scales on one string, you know. It was learning which chords sound nice together. It's just all of that kind of general musicality, I guess. It was writing songs as well. Something I never really kind of mentioned really was that from the moment I picked up a guitar, I wanted to use it to be able to write songs. And for the longest time, those songs were absolutely terrible, and probably argued they still are now. But it was wanting to use it as a kind of bit of a tool for self-expression, I guess. So it was always in my hands to some degree, So it was never a case of like, right, now I'm going to sit down and I'm going to practice this scale or this mode or this, kind of chord progression or whatever, so much as just, I want to play guitar. I'm just literally going to do nothing from the moment I get in from school until I go to bed. I'm just going to play guitar, and then I'm going to get up early in the morning to play some more guitar before I have to go to school, So, I discovered it at the worst possible time, really, just prior to my GCSEs. So, I've no doubt my academic achievements in life would be far stronger if I hadn't discovered it when I did. But, now if I pick up a guitar and I'm sat on the sofa, it's being used to write. It's being used to kind of find chord progressions that go nicely together, and kind of why they work together, It's never been a conscious thought process of like, I'm going to practice this today,
No, never done the structured 5 minutes of this, 10 minutes of that.
What, in light of our conversation, what do you think?
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. It is exactly how I imagine, because I was the guy who had to do things in boxes, right? I'm the organized guy. I need to compartmentalize things, and I need to have a structure. And I've often said to students that most of the great guitar players didn't do that. Eric Clapton, Jimmy Page, or whatever. They didn't sit down with a freaking little diagram and tick off the box when they'd done their 5-minute scale practice. Or they might have done, but I'm pretty sure they didn't.
Yeah.
But what they did have that most other people didn't have is the time to do that, to muck around and play guitar 8 hours a day. If you've got a regular job and you've only got 1 hour a day, probably you need to take as many shortcuts as you can with music theory and whatever else. But the thing that it gives you if you take the experimental muck around, just play guitar approach, is that you end up like a kind of a truer artist of the genre. Does that?
Yeah, I guess I don't know about that. Thank you. It's I guess it's the luxury of picking it up when I did pick it up, really, and it took over my life. Prior to that, I was playing cricket, I was playing football, I was playing rugby. Believe it or not, I had a couple of games at prop, which still blows my mind to this day. Why anyone picked me for that, but I was kind of into everything. I was into skateboarding. I was massive into skateboarding when I was a kid, and there were all these things kind of dividing my attention, I guess. But then when I found guitar, it was like, oh, that's now what matters. I gave up cricket, I gave up football, I gave up everything to pursue guitar, and part of that was a somewhat self-preservation thing of like, well, let's look after my fingers. I don't want to be stood in the slips trying to catch edges if I'm kind of not wanting to dislocate my fingers. But at the same time, it was just, well, it gives me more time to play guitar, So it is a luxury of picking it up when you're young, and like you said, if you're picking this up in later life when there's jobs and there's responsibilities and there's kids and there's all that kind of stuff, like now, for example, with just the pressures of life, I guess, and all the kind of stuff that goes on with it. If I was learning to play guitar now, it would have to be more structured because I don't have the time to just sit and dick about on the guitar, So yeah, it's one of the luxuries of picking it up when I did, I guess.
Amazing. Okay, now we haven't done a whole lot of playing, and so I'm hoping that this next question might pick this. So this is from Heck, and he says, when watching Chris play, I noticed he uses both fingerstyle and plectrum techniques. How challenging was it to master this combination? It's amazing. And I want to add to that. Can you explain a little bit about your approach? If there's, having just had the previous half an hour chat, I suspect there's not a very exact calculation here. But is there a way that you divvy up between using a pick and the fingers, and can you demonstrate what it is? I'm going to disappear off the screen so people can see you clearly as well.
Yeah, cool. There was actually, ironically, this is probably one of the few elements of my playing where there has been a degree of thought process involved in it. And that was purely that, well, this nail, I've spoken about this at length on different videos, so apologies if this is old news, but this finger, my index finger, for some reason, going back to when we were talking about the punk rock stuff and the Offspring and the Newfound Glory and all that kind of stuff that I was listening to when I first got into guitar, I went through a phase, and I still to this day don't know why I did this, went through a phase of exclusively using this finger, but as a plectrum. So basically all kind of, get the pick out of my hand so you can see what I'm doing. So that finger, all that kind of stuff, all, kind of fast palm muted stuff, but using that nail. And as a consequence, just totally wrecked that nail. It just snaps. It just refuses to grow. And, you know, I said it before, it snaps like a wet Kit Kat at the first sign of trouble. You know, even doing that now, the sensation of skin on nail on string, I guess, kind of goes through me a little bit, just because I can feel how weak it is and that it wants to snap. So when it came to starting to use my fingers, the only natural conclusion, well, if that finger is bloody useless in essence, that can hold the plectrum. I can tuck that in the kind of crevice, I guess, crease, whatever you want to call it, of that finger there, and use my thumb and my middle finger and my ring finger as a bit of a kind of claw kind of mechanism, I guess. So all of the kind of... whether it's chordal stuff like that, it's the thumb doing the bass notes and my second and third finger doing the kind of more treble stuff, or whether it's lead stuff, pretty much exclusively my second finger, my middle finger, doing that kind of... jazz notes for free. So that again is kind of thumb doing the lower notes, but pretty much all of the kind of more delicate, kind of accurate stuff, I guess, is my middle finger. Hesitate to do that to show you, but you know what I mean. So yeah, that's pretty much one of the few conscious thought processes I guess I ever put in the guitar, was actually, well, that finger's useless, so that might as well do something. And if that's hold the pick, that then is just that little swift motion there to kind of get it back into the fingers. Like I said earlier, I'm wildly clumsy, so it's pretty much the only dexterous thing in my life I can do. But yes, I guess especially then after I started doing the YouTube stuff, where there was a bit more of a focus on what my right hand was doing, people started pinpointing it as being, oh, that's really unique, or that's weird, or that's interesting. I genuinely never really given it much thought prior to that. I started doing it when I was relatively young, I guess. I probably would have been in like sixth form maybe, and it was just like an exercise, I guess, in my mind, or a kind of curiosity to try and figure out, well, the slash stuff, or the more accurate, faster stuff that I'm doing, can I do that with my fingers? And a lot of time the answer is no, which I guess then answers the next part of your question, Justin, as to kind of when I do each, or when I do kind of, you know, playing with my fingers versus playing with a pick. It's very much a conscious or subconscious thought process at this point as to when I do either. But that's the one thing that I guess informs it. Is it dynamically loud and aggressive? If it is, it's probably going to be a pick. Is it subtle? Is it soft? Is it, you know, delicate? It's probably going to be my fingers. And if it has to be fast, and fluid and accurate, again, I'll probably rely on a plectrum more heavily. But if I'm trying to say something soft or more kind of, you know, I guess dynamic, you know, you have infinitely more dynamic expression in your fingertips, pardon the pun, just because of how soft and fleshy they are. You know, if you try and play, I don't know, something like that with your pick, if you try and play that really softly, it gets softer, it gets quieter, but it still has like an immediacy and an attack, because it's just a pick. It's a bit of plastic, I guess, or whatever it's made out of. You know, it still has that kind of sharpness and that directness to the front end of the note. If you play it with your fingers, however, if you're digging with a nail, you kind of get some of that directness back. But if you play with the edge or the tip of your fingers, where it's really soft and fleshy, whether or not it's coming across on here, I don't know, but to me at least, it feels and sounds like this a lot more dynamic and kind of textural control over using my fingers, or with using my fingers, than there is using a pick. A pick always sounds like a pick, I guess, at the end of the day, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely makes sense. I'm a really big fan of dynamics in music and guitar and solos, and I think one of the things that I really dig about your playing is the breadth of different tones that you can get from, exactly as you demonstrated, the fleshy part of the finger for that really soft, delicate thing, the tip where it gets a bit more bitey, the snap, which I think you sometimes do like almost like
Yeah.
snapping the string against the frets. But then you've got all of the same things that everyone else has with the pick. So the fact that you're able to switch between those things so fluently really makes a...
Strangely, it was kind of,
you know.
again, it was putting the kind of, what's the phrase, putting the horse before the cart, I guess, to a degree, in terms of how I got to this. And it was a case of, it wasn't particularly one person. I've come to realise, obviously, there's lots of players that use their fingers a lot. It's Jeff Beck, it's Mark Knopfler, it's Derek Trucks, it's whoever. But me discovering those guys kind of came after the fact to a degree, and probably informed some of the stuff that I do then, admittedly. Derek Trucks in particular, watching Derek Trucks, kind of really dig in. And again, I'm quite a tactile player. I use heavy strings. I kind of really dig in when I play, just because, not because I'm hard. I'm just very heavy-handed. In everything I do in life, I'm just very heavy-handed, as I referenced earlier with the clumsiness. So I like to hit hard when I play. And it feels more tactile. It's a more kind of enjoyable experience for me, I guess, if I'm really kind of digging in and kind of really getting the most of what I'm doing. And watching Derek Trucks is a great example of that. Watching his right hand and kind of those big kind of rakes, all that kind of stuff. I've referenced it innumerable times, but the solo for Midnight in Harlem from the Crossroads Festival in 2013 or whatever it was, is just a masterclass in dynamics and expression and control and everything you want in a guitar solo. And so much of that is him really going for it with that kind of claw motion, and kind of using his fingers that in almost the kind of flamenco-y kind of way to really kind of dig in on the strings. But again, I was already kind of doing that by the time I found those guys, and then, like I said, that undoubtedly informed what came later. But it was just me, kind of dicking around, sat on the sofa, probably dropping a pick, it disappearing down the side of the sofa, and thinking, right, let's rather than finding that, let's see how well I can play with my fingers, So
See, what I found really interesting that you mentioned Derek Trucks is when you were demonstrating that before, and the way you played at the intro. Actually, that was my first thought, was that your right hand was looking very Derek Trucksy.
Yeah.
And there's a few interesting parts about that. One, you've picked up on the technique and the muting and the heavy-handedness.
Yeah.
It looks to me like you're using the edge of your thumb as a mute. Would that be right? So like your thumb,
pretty much.
Your thumb, the tip of the thumb is muting the string above the one you're playing.
Yeah.
And then the rest of it is muting. And that allows you to do those big motions with that hand without all of those strings ringing out.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, stuff like this is stuff that I've never given a great deal of conscious thought to be honest. But then when someone actually points it out, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense, I guess. But yeah, that kind of fleshy part of my hand in particular is kind of constantly moving and pivoting, I guess, to kind of, kill other notes, Sorry, it's the key of the day, apparently.
I listened to you play it all day, but what I also found interesting about the Derek Trucks analogy is that you spent a lot of time earlier talking about how you play in a horizontal fashion. And of course, if you're a slide guitar player, you're going to be playing more that way. So I found that, I think that was probably what the muting with the thumb and the fact that you're playing horizontally to find those melodic lines did feel very Derek Trucksy. But as well, you have a very similar vocal expressiveness to the way you play, which is, it really evokes Derek Trucks in the little micro bends and all of that kind of thing, which, given the conversation so far, I'm imagining it just happened that way. But was there any conscious thought process to embellishments?
I think... Yeah, is the short answer. I'm a big Derek Trucks fan. Again, that's never particularly manifested in wanting to try and learn Derek Trucks licks or even learn slide. My slide playing is an abomination. It's really not very good. So, it was I guess it was a decision then to try and, let's try and take that expressiveness and try and take that fluidity that someone like Derek Trucks has because of the slide in part, and try and apply that logic to guitar playing, but, sans slide, all of those little microtonal kind of, whether they're bends or whether they're slides. So if you take something like this, just 50th, 7th fret and back. there's ways of making that more vocal and making that more fluid and more expressive. And like one would be a little microtonal kind of slide. That to me, and obviously to someone like Derek Trucks, feels infinitely more vocal and infinitely more kind of, I guess, human, because it's probably what a singer would do. It's what a great, kind of soul singer. It's what Aretha would do. It's what Otis Redding would do. It's what, kind of Bob Marley or Paolo Nutini or whoever it is, whoever your kind of vocal influences are. There would probably be little inflections. There would be little kind of, idiosyncrasies.
I hate to interrupt you, but could you angle that mic a tiny bit, because the bottom of the mic is covering
covering the front one, is it? Sorry.
No, I want to see what he's doing. Sorry to interrupt. Sorry.
No, it's not at all. So that kind of... whatever it is, just nonsense, noodling. All of those little kind of, or the kind of slidey bendy stuff, whatever you want to kind of call it, I guess, that we kind of talked about earlier. That's where that comes in.
So I mentioned it to Chris earlier when I was talking about things we might chat about. I'd love him. We've already had a chat. In fact, I think there's a whole video where Chris came to visit me at my house, my studio, a few years ago, I want to say.
Yeah,
4 or
probably
5 years ago, something.
Well, it was BC, wasn't it? It was before COVID. So, we can kind of split life in half now.
And we talked about this bendy, slidey thing, which I'd never seen anyone do, and I absolutely love the sound of it. So it kind of ties in nicely. Can you share with the good people of Tinternet exactly what's going on there and how it works?
Again, limited kind of thought process. If I try and adjust this up a bit, you have a better chance of seeing the guitar. Limited thought process, I guess, other than listening to... Again, that's one of the few kind of genuinely diligent moments or kind of genuinely sort of conscientious moments that I've had in my life, was listening to people like Sam Cooke and trying to replicate their melodies, trying to replicate the melody for songs, but not just in a sense of like, well, what are the notes? So much as how do they get to those notes? How is Sam Cooke getting from that note? Is he sliding off it? Is he cutting it off dead? What's he doing? And trying to replicate that, so taking melodies from songs, not even particularly melodies from those songs, but just taking a melody that and trying to turn that into something a little bit more fluid, So again, I've done this at kind of clinics and stuff, but an example I use is that idea of Sweet Child of Mine. So the melody itself... This is one of those fit for hands days I was talking about earlier. Taking a melody like that and playing it like that is pretty much how it would be written out in sheet music, I guess. It's how you would kind of transcribe it if you're using Sibelius or something. Probably showing my age there. And then trying to think, well, that's not how it's sung. That's not how Axl Rose sings it. It would be, that first note. You don't come in on a... It's not robotic. It would be something like... Or it would be... Whatever it happens to be, listen to melodies and listen to how singers are phrasing and their idiosyncrasies and their little nuances and unique things that they do, and trying to then apply that to guitar somehow. So playing a melody like Sweet Child of Mine and doing that, not overdoing it, not making it flowery and, kind of nonsense, but... slide in between notes, doing that Sweet Love of Mine. Tab that out, it's going to be... But there's ways of doing that. Even that, where you basically pick the first note and then slide the rest of them, that's more reflective, I guess, for me of how you might sing it, because you use one breath to convey those notes. You don't sweet love of mine. You don't split it up, syllabically. You kind of, it rolls out. It's more dynamic. It's more fluid. It's more breathy, I guess, as a consequence. And trying to cop some of that on guitar, so it doesn't have to be, but it can be, or whatever, But the slidey bendy thing, I guess, came as a consequence of that. Then, where you're trying to kind of like, notes in there somewhere. Just trying to be more expressive with it, I guess. Trying to be more fluid and more human. I guess that's all we're trying to be, Justin. We just want to be more human.
More human than we
I'm
really are.
I'm available for life coaching as well if you want it. Pseudo-intellectual bullshit life coaching. I can do that.
Oh, come on, Chris, come on. So, one of the things that sounds like you're doing that I think that maybe people might not have caught is doing a bend, but then doing a little forward and backward slide back to the note that you bent from.
Yeah.
Which I... No, I can't do it. That thing.
So there's a couple of ways of doing it, I guess. You can wobble while you're up there, for want of a better phrase. You can do that kind of, where if you try and slow that down, it sounds terrible. That's the beauty of doing this, I guess, is that you're not particularly constrained by notes, because you're not lingering on any notes too long. If you try and slow that down, it suddenly sounds, awful, because there's all of these notes which ordinarily are not applicable to what key you're playing in. But if you kind of, you're whatever it is, Again, a big part of that way of playing, I guess, is knowing the guitar you're on. Bluntly, knowing the guitar's kind of how the strings kind of intonate, and how far you have to bend. Knowing your string gauge, I guess, ultimately as well. Knowing that if you kind of, and again, that's something, I guess, I'm stumbling across all of these things here, which I do actually genuinely practice, but I've never really given it much thought. Something I have given a little bit of attention to over the years is trying to hit notes and make sure that I'm pre-bending to a note and then I'm bang in tune and my intonation is spot on. So if I'm playing in, if I'm trying to hit an A there, for example, and I'm bending up from my 8th fret and I'm trying to hit this note perfectly. Bend up from your 8th fret and hit it bang on. Don't be. And I have to do that because that gives me a sense of confidence then that I can pre-bend to stuff and I know that I'm going to hit it. And also working on this kind of stuff. And knowing that you're going to land on the right fret and that when you land on the right fret, you're then going to be bending far enough to get to the correct note or get to the note that you're aiming for, if that makes sense. So, that's... I remember talking about it years ago. Weirdly, one of the few kind of little exercisey kind of things that I could kind of think of to try and do this was the bloody theme of one of the songs from Oliver, the musical. It's a song called Where Is Love? And I think the reason this has stuck with me was that we did a school production of it. Craig, if you're listening, mate, you absolutely murdered it. And not in a good way. They put a mate of mine in charge of singing that. And it's such a sweet melodic song that I guess unless you're perfectly hitting those notes, it's going to sound terrible. And it did. So it stuck with me as a particularly good example to try and, kind of Let's have a think. So we would be doing. That's the start of the melody. And then the second bit. I remember trying to learn that and trying to kind of bend to pitch. So going. And trying to make sure that I was kind of bang on those notes, I guess. Just as a bit of an exercise to try and kind of, not only know the intervals and the distances between the notes and make sure that you're bending far enough, but then also be familiar with the guitar that you're on. Something I really struggle with is if I'm given a guitar with lighter gauge strings than I'm used to. If they're like nines or something, I'm overbending like an absolute mother. It's terrible. Just because I'm applying too much pressure. I'm applying too much pressure with my right hand usually, so everything's being bent sharp. And then the first thing I will do is go. Or, whatever it happens to be, because I'm not used to the kind of the relative tension of that guitar, I guess. So taking melodies and trying to play them in a more vocal way, and also just trying to get used to the idea of, well, you need to bend that far to reach that note. And then just basic stuff as well, like trying to close your eyes and I'm going to cock this up now, but try and slide from like your 3rd fret to your 15th fret on your E string and go. Told you. Trying to familiarize myself with just like the scale length of the guitar and how far I need to go between things. And it just gives you a sense of confidence of like, oh, well, I know my way around, and I know that if I slide up to a note, I'm probably going to land on the right fret, or at least there's a decent chance I will land on the right fret. And as long as you're not sharp of it, you can always bend up to it. So,
So I've just had an interesting thought while you were just talking then about you use a lot of like microtonal bends, I guess is the fancy word for it. But small, very expressive bending, and a lot of playing up and down one string.
Yeah.
And the 2 guitar players that spring to mind that do super expressive, beautiful guitar like yourself are Jeff Beck and Derek Trucks. And they both play quite a lot horizontally. They both play very expressively, both using their fingers, quite interestingly. But there's one thing that both those guys use that you don't, which I'm really curious now about, which is the fine control of the notes using, for Derek Trucks was a slide, and for Jeff Beck was a whammy bar. And I've never seen you use a whammy bar. So they're both doing stuff like to hit a note, they're able to make the note go lower, whereas on a fretted instrument you can only bend it higher to get a vibrato. Is this? Have you experimented with either slide or using a whammy bar and it just didn't work for you? Or...
Yeah, slide playing, it was something that I would love to devote a bit of attention to at some point, because as I referenced earlier, my slide playing is an absolute abomination. It's terrible. And it's just through a lack of time spent. They were just, I guess when I was kind of at that pivotal moment of, kind of absorbing all of this music like a sponge, I wasn't really listening to any slide players. And as a consequence, I guess it wasn't something that I kind of really gravitated towards. Like I said, Slash was a huge influence, and obviously there were a couple of moments in a Guns N' Roses set where he would pick out a slide, but I always found those the kind of least inspiring moments, I guess. So it was kind of like, oh, okay, maybe I'll just leave the slide to the slide guys. As for trem arms or kind of vibrato, I was a Strat guy for years. And the first ever decent Strat that I had was one that my old man and me put together, like a parts caster from various bits, just bought on eBay. No idea what we were doing. Both of us had never put a guitar together before. And miraculously, it turned out pretty well, aside from the trem, which the moment you so much as looked at it, it just went wildly out of tune. So I was like, well, I just won't use that then. Okay, I don't want to bloody sound like Hank Marvin anyway. I'll put the trem arm away, much to my eternal shame. So I never really was a trem guy and a Strat particularly, because I was a little bit frightened of it. And then by the time I got to a point where I should really be using a trem at this point, I was relatively in the public eye. I was in a band playing original songs, I was touring and all this kind of stuff. So I thought, well, now is not the time, Kato. Now is not the time to be experimenting with that and trying to get the grips with a bloody trem arm in front of a couple of hundred people. So it was just never something I kind of really delved into. Obviously, this is a Rap Tail, so there's very little room for kind of wibbly wobbly stuff on that. And most of the other guitars that I play, I love Bigsby equipped guitars, but that's not so much for the trem trickery, so much as just like gentle, fluctuation in pitch, I guess. It's not really a trem to be.
You do it though, and that's what I find really interesting is that you have that same level of expression and attention to detail and vocal inflections in when you play a melody that those other guys do, but they've got that other tool.
Yeah.
You know.
Oh, cool. Well,
It's
thank
kind
you.
of interesting.
One thing that I do a lot, which is totally unrelated to this, but kind of got me thinking about it then, which I used to get a lot of grief about on YouTube because nobody really understands it, is that kind of idea of neck vibrato. And I remember me and you talking about this. Was it Jim Campolongo, maybe, you referenced? As kind of like a guy that you first saw doing that. And that sent me down a bit of a rabbit hole of watching him. But that idea of like, you know, a chord doesn't have to be static, particularly. You know, it's if you play, you can give it a bit of. And the moment there's like a visual element to that on YouTube, people are like, oh, well, you're just doing it because it's, you know, it looks cool or whatever, you know, or it's kind of, it's the hipster thing to do. Believe it or not, I've been playing guitar a lot longer than I've been bloody making YouTube videos. So it wasn't done for visual effect then, and it wasn't done for visual effect on videos. Undoubtedly, it becomes a little bit of a tick, I guess, or a little bit of a kind of just something which happens. The other thing people point out all the time, and you can probably tell from the bloody volume control wear around there, is that I'm constantly checking my volume. If I'm in the middle of a solo, I know in my heart of hearts that I'm up full, but I'm always looking to, you know, go Spinal Tap and push it over the edge and see if there's a number 11 that I can find. So it's these little kind of like ticks that you do when you're playing to focus your mind, I guess.
Okay, so you're not actually adjusting it. You're just like you're checking.
There are moments where I'm adjusting it, yeah. Like especially, I don't know, I'm trying to think of like moments in the set. There's a lot of like dynamic moments, I guess, where a solo will start, for example, on a kind of like, I do volume swells a lot, that kind of idea of like, and then the start of the solo might be, and then it ramps up, you know, to, so there is a lot of volume stuff going on, but admittedly some of that, when you see me doing that live, it's a bit of a kind of tick of like, just checking them up. Yep, still on 10, still on 10, still on 10. But
I overheard Jeff Beck talking about that most of the time when he's playing regularly, he has the guitar volume on like 8 or somewhere near 9.
Yeah.
And he only turns it fully up when he gets further up the neck because it feels like the notes further up the neck needed a bit more juice. So he used to adjust the volume depending on where he was on the neck. I'm like, while he's doing that other stuff, like I'd struggle to do any of it, let alone be thinking, oh, this when I'm up here now, I need to turn the volume at like.
Yeah, I know. Yes. I remember during Job on a Master say something similar actually, which I guess with the kind of sound that he tends to play with and the kind of rigs that he tends to play with, which are obviously kind of fairly mid-rangey, fairly gainy, that makes sense a little bit more because you can kind of, especially with the Les Paul, you've got a set of humbuckers pushing an amp that little bit harder, I guess. So you can probably get away with it being on 8 most of the time, and that's still feeling like a sufficient amount of volume and a sufficient amount of gain to get away with, and then you kind of push it over the edge and take it to 10 or whatever it is, you know, when you're really looking for it. For me, I guess, with P90s and using considerably less gain than that, I probably spend, I don't know, 75% of the set on 10 and just using my fingers and using my attack to kind of temper the volume, I guess, then. Yeah. As you can see, I don't use the tone control anywhere near as much as the volume control, so.
Amazing. Okay. We're pretty much out of time. I just wanted to point out to Ashu and Chris, who both had questions. Ashu was about the switching between the plectrum and the fingers, and Chris was about memorization and spontaneous improvisation. Both those questions we kind of covered in our chat, so I don't feel like I didn't get to those questions. And I promised I'd have a quick look at the YouTube questions. So Toby's a blimmer. Can Justin invite Chris to join the British Blues Posse as an honorary member? We have Corey, Kong, Gilio, and Jeff McGetry. Okay, I will speak to you about that later. Okay, Erica says, what solo from a Cardinal Black song was the most difficult to create?
Good question, Erica. Probably it's a track called I'm Ready, which is it started off as a kind of like a relatively mid-tempo kind of thing, and the band unanimously agreed that it either sounded better much slower or much faster. So we did both, and it turned into a bit of a kind of this an Alabama Shakes track, which we used as a little bit of a kind of reference track. And for the life of me, I can't remember what it's bloody called now, but it's basically a track in two halves. So it kind of gets to the midpoint and kind of really kicks up a notch, and it almost sounds like a totally separate song until you recognize the chord progression is the same. And that was kind of the approach we took with I'm Ready. So it's this chord progression, which is like a very old soul kind of like... to the start. So that for the duration of the track is like proper Ray Charles, you know. Super slow, and then really kicks up a notch at the end. And it's one of those solos where it kind of really, it helps if you follow the chord changes around a little bit, as opposed to just kind of, you know, going for it in whatever position you're in. So that was a bit of a kind of, you know, the solo is... So straight away down to the kind of B7 here. Etc., etc. Following those chord changes around. Without it, it's a proper gripe of mine of watching players infinitely better than myself, with so much more knowledge and so much more kind of expressive potential than me, get a little bit bogged down in just following chord changes around. And it's kind of, for me, it sucks the flow out of it, sucks the thread out of it. What we were kind of talking earlier with that Stevie Ray thing. I want to watch someone kind of get lost in it, as opposed to it be like a cerebral activity of like, well, now we're on the diminished or whatever, you know. There's moments for that, and all of my players who use that beautifully, like, I don't know, Robin Ford, to use an example, it's mixed with just like pure expression, where you can tell they're just getting lost and following the kind of melody in their head. And then they have that kind of technical knowledge to be able to go, right, I'm going to outline that chord now, as opposed to just outlining every chord. For one, it just becomes a little bit overused then, for my money. It becomes a little bit, okay, we get it. We know, you know where you are, and, you know, you kind of, you know how to outline every bloody chord on the fretboard. It just ceases to be as expressive. It becomes like a technical exercise then of like, look how many shapes I know. So I was conscious of kind of wanting to outline chords and it be kind of, you know, be cognizant, I guess, of like all these chord changes kind of going on underneath the solo, but at the same time still kind of feeling like it was expressive and kind of building. And again, in regard to like structure and solo, something I do all the time, way too much, undoubtedly, is that idea of like start low, aim high. It builds this sense of like anticipation of kind of like, this is building and building and building and building, and literally it couldn't get any higher. The last notes of those solo are whatever it is. So you're up to like, you know, kind of 22nd fret bend, they're bending a, you know, kind of tone and a half. So it builds that sense of anticipation, you know. But yeah, that was not a difficult one so much as like a fun one to actually invest a little bit of time and energy in, because I thought this could be a cool moment, you know, to try and feel like it's not just a cerebral activity of look how many chords I know, because I don't know that many. Might surprise you.
Making the changes is a really interesting area, because if you don't make changes at all, it doesn't sound like you're paying attention to what the rest of the band are doing. Like you're a bit isolated. So you need to pay attention to what's going on harmonically. But if you do it too much, it gets stale and it just sounds like you're practicing arpeggios.
Absolutely. And there's subtle ways of doing it as well. It doesn't have to be like, you know, kind of like the, you know, all that kind of stuff. It can be just subtly alluding to notes within the kind of the chord, you know, and outlining things in a more nuanced manner than, you know, just every note. For me,
absolutely.
Anyway. Rant over.
Mate, you're here to rant. That was the whole point.
You've got me on my high horse now.
Dude, we're all good. But we need to finish. I don't know. I guess you've got to get home. I've got to do story time. If I don't get upstairs pretty soon and read my daughter's story, she won't never go to sleep. So, man, thank you so much for joining us for this. It's been a pleasure hanging out with you. And
Oh man, pleasure.
yeah, super fascinating for me. I'm sure for many of the guys, if not all of the guys in the crew here, lots of great comments coming through. So I really appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll do this again real soon.
Absolutely, man.
When are you next on tour? When can people catch you live? Where you're moving?
We've got a little bit of time actually now. We've got one concluding tour date of the thing, which is Cardiff, which is our kind of hometown show. So that sold out a couple of months ago, so that should be a good one. But then the album, our second album, which we've kind of been in a roundabout way touring, I guess, on this tour, which isn't actually released yet, will be coming out early next year. And then we've got a busy year of US tours, back out in Europe, UK again. So yeah, nothing actually announced yet or particularly concrete, but next year is going to be a busy one. So.
And best place for people to find your schedule for like workshops, tours, and all of that sort of stuff would be Chris Buck Music.
chrisbuckguitar.co.uk.
Chris Buck Guitar, sorry, yeah.
And if I'm allowed a gratuitous plug as well,
please.
I released my first ever book about a week ago. It's erotic fiction. No, it's it's called. Conveniently, I have a copy here. It's called The Best of Friday Fretworks, and it was 10 of the kind of most requested solos from Friday Fretworks that we had transcribed. It's backing tracks. It's guitar rig presets. It's Helix presets, all in there. So if you want to play like me, grab a copy of that. That'd be great. I'm not gonna pay my mortgage then.
And where would people get that from? From the website?
Yeah, chrisbuckguitar.co.uk. If you want to get a digital copy of it, if you want to get a physical copy of it, it's on Amazon and all that kind of good stuff. So I've been blown away by the response to it. Turns out people, for some reason, are interested in what I have to say. So
I shall get a copy for myself, and you can sign it for me next time you're over. And we will get links to those things as soon as possible, either in the chat and on YouTube video and wherever this is shown.
Thank you, man.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Have yourself a fantastic rest of your week. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. If you want to check out more of my blues stuff as well, head on over to the website and check out the Blues Immersion course, where lots of the people here are currently just about to finish that class, and the enrollment for the second class finishes in a couple of days now. I can't remember. Fanny and Marina are going to be really mad at me, but shortly anyway. So check it out now if you want to get involved with the next cohort. So we'll see you all very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.